Thank you for an opportunity to study your word again. This time we're going into the genealogy where we obviously can use as much help as possible. Please help us learn what it is you want to know. Thank you for our friends and family being able to join. In Jesus' name, amen.
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 So if you have extra bookmarks or pages for those using a Bible, a paper Bible, you might want to put bookmarks in at Matthew chapter 1, Chronicles chapter 1, and Luke chapter 3. We'll probably bounce a little bit between those. We'll be spending a little bit of time in Genesis. If you don't, you can pull up your apps pretty quick. I'll try not to bounce around too much, but the Bible has a lot more genealogy than a lot of people give it credit for. And so the goal of tonight is to just learn a little bit more about the genealogy and how it applies to kind of dating things and whatnot. And it should be, hopefully we can find some interesting things. So I'd like to start in the book of Matthew. So the very first book of the New Testament so that should be very easy to always remember. The first book and first chapter and first verse of the New Testament is one of the places to find the genealogy of Christ, and it's directly associated with Jesus' paternal side, so his father Joseph. Now Luke chapter 3 talks about a lot of people believe that Luke chapter 3 covers his mom's side, so the genealogy of Mary from Christ to Mary all the way back to God, actually, in Luke. It's a very long account, but Matthew's a bit shorter. And so what we're going to try to do is go through this first chapter of Matthew, and then we'll notice where it starts in verse 1. It starts with Abraham as the oldest person. And so then we're going to answer the question, well, where do we pick up Abraham's genealogy? And for that, we'll have to, there's a number of places to go, but we'll go back to Genesis to do that. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the genealogy here in Matthew, and you see that it goes back in time and moves forward with chapter 1, but I'm going to do it a little different. And why don't we start by looking at Matthew chapter 1, verse 17, a very good verse, a very kind of a helpful verse, in my opinion, to kind of help measure things out, and then see, can we validate verse 17 with the genealogy that's given before it on the same page. So 117 says, so all the generations from Abraham to David are 14 generations, and from David unto the carrying away into Babylon are 14 generations, and from the carrying away into Babylon unto Christ are 14 generations. So there you have 3 sets of 14. And then we can ask ourselves, well, is it actually possible to go through and identify those 14 generations, because he's making it very clear. So we can start with the first part of verse 17, Abraham to David are 14 generations. So when you go to verse 1, you'll see Abraham. So that's 1. And I'm just going to walk you through it. And I know a lot of people don't like to read the genealogy. A lot of people actually stop reading their Bible when they get into the genealogy because they find it so boring. But my goal here is to measure out those first 14 generations, actually all sets of 14. So we'll start with the first one, starts with Abraham. And remember that verse 17 says Abraham to David are 14. So we start with, now don't get confused where it says Jesus Christ, the son of David, because he's not the direct son of David, but that was the name that they gave him. But the line actually starts with Abraham. Okay. So Abraham is 1, and then Isaac is 2 in verse 2. Jacob is 3, also in verse 2. And then you have Judas is 4. Phares is 5. Ezram is 6. Now, don't worry about the names too much, because depending on your translation, the names vary. You might have a Hebrew name, you might have a Greek name, you could have a Latin name, and sometimes the names don't look close, but they are. Sometimes they're really close, and you can tell. But I'm reading out of the King James. So I went Ezram 6, Aram 7, also known as Ram. Sometimes you'll see his name. Aminadab is 8. Nasan is 9. Salmon is 10. Booz, also known as Boaz, you'll see him in the book of Ruth. He's 11. And then Obed is 12. Jesse is 13. And lo and behold, we come upon David at 14. So you can see right there that all the names are perfectly in line. Now, if you counted all the names, you'd run into a little bit of trouble. For example, it says Obed of Ruth. Well, that's just one of those points where they're referencing a female. And I think in Matthew, they do that at least 3 times, if I'm not mistaken. We might find a couple more of those. So there's your first set of 14, and that helps us validate what Matthew wrote here. And now going to look at the second set of 14, what does he say in verse 17? He says, from David to the carrying away of Babylon. Well, how do we know the carrying away of Babylon? Well, the way we measure that is we know which kings were in place at the time Babylon was taken. And so all we have to do is identify the king at the time. And then we'll know at that point we can get to the 14. In this case, Josias is the king, and that he had some brothers. So there was a lot of kings at the time, and these were the kings of Judah. And we'll get to that. But let's go ahead and quickly identify the second set of 14. So we start at David, and I'm in, let's see, I think verse 6 there. And then you can go David 1, Solomon 2. And I'm going to just add a little bit of input here. There were 3 kings before the kingdom split. So when the kingdom split, it split into Judah and Israel. But there were 3 kings in place before the kingdom split. So the first king was Saul, the second king was David, and the third king was Solomon. After that, the kingdom split. You end up with 20 kings of Judah, and you get plus a queen, and then you also get 19 kings of Israel. We won't talk anymore about the kings of Israel, but we will be talking about the kings of Judah, because most of those kings are in the direct lineage of Christ, meaning the kings of Judah, most, if not all of them, are distant great grandparents of Jesus. So I had David 1, and we're doing the second set of 14 now. David 1, Solomon 2, Rehoboam 3, Abiah 4, Asa 5, Josaphat 6, Joram 7. On a side note, Matthew actually leaves out 3 names that should appear here in the line of the kings. But he leaves them out. There's different reasons for that. Some people say that they were so evil during that time that they didn't want to include them in the lineage. Other people say that in order to keep the sets of 14, Matthew did it that way. And so that's kind of a subject of debate. And then just back, and I'll pick up on getting to the end of the 14 there, but just backing up, Rehoboam was the first king of Judah, and he was the son of King Solomon. And then in order, you can pretty much count the kings as who they were. So for example, Abiah was the second king of Judah. Asa was the third king. Josaphat was the fourth king. Joram, the fifth king. And then that's where you get a skip. They basically skip the 6th, 7th, and 8th king. And he goes all the way to Uzziah or Azariah, which is the 10th king. And I know this is a lot, but let's go back to finish the 14, knowing that there's a skip of genealogy in there. So you have, I went from like Asa 5, Josaphat 6, Joram 7, Ozias 8, Jotham 9, Ezekiel 11, Manasseh 12, Amon 13, and then Josiah 14. So there's the second set of 14. And remember, I said that the carrying away of Babylon, Josiah was the king at the time. So we know that that was about the exact time that they were taken away. And so we know that we can finish the comfortably and confidently finish the second set of 14 by ending on Josiah. The date of the taking away of Babylon was about 597 BC. And this is described in the book of Daniel. We're not going to go back to read it right now, but it's described in Daniel 5. Babylon was a giant kingdom that they said the walls were so wide that you could ride multiple chariots side by side on the top of the wall. Basically, it was impenetrable. Nobody could defeat it. But Babylon did eventually fall, and it was during the time of King Cyrus, who was the king of the Medes and the Persians. And while the Babylonians were partying and drinking wine and whatnot, Cyrus was able to divert the water from underneath the walls to go in a different direction. It dried out in a relatively short amount of time, and then they went under the walls, and that's how they defeated the kingdom of Babylon. And the night that they were defeated or invaded, the king Belshazzar, whose father had defeated the Babylonians and defeated the Jewish people at the time, they had taken away all the vessels, all the treasure of Jerusalem, and they decided that while they were drunk, hey, let's go ahead and get the vessels out of my father's trophy room, and we'll drink wine out of that, which I'm sure God took great offense to. And so they ended up abusing the vessels and getting drunk and doing all the things that they shouldn't be. And at that point, that's where we also read about the writing on the wall that you might remember that Daniel was able to interpret, and they were taken down. And that's how the Babylonian kingdom fell. And they know exactly where Babylon is today. A lot of it's been excavated. Some of it's been taken away and rebuilt in museums. And even Saddam Hussein, when he was in power, was trying to recreate the Babylonian kingdom because it was in his region. And in fact, he did create some of it, renovate it, however you will, to kind of try to bring back that glory, which he was never able to see through. Then after Josiah, Matthew omitted one other king, and that was Jehoiakim. And he was another evil king at the time. And you can see why it was evil. I mean, it was leading up to a point in which the kings were rebelling probably more and more against God, and which eventually led to their downfall. God was so disappointed with them, he allowed King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon to take over the kingdom because they weren't doing what God said. And then you may remember a terrible description during that time that Jehoiakim, who's not referenced here, he had a brother named Zedekiah, and it was Zedekiah who watched his sons killed in front of him, and then his eyes were taken out. One of those horrible descriptions in the Bible that was believed to be true. So then finally, let's try to pick up on this last 14, the third set of 14, which is described in verse 17 of Matthew as 14 generations from the carrying away of Babylon unto Christ. So we know that Josiah was the time of the carrying away. And Jeconiah, I believe, was right at that time too. There was a number of kings at the time, or at least children and fathers and whatnot that were taken away. So we start the third set of 14 at Jeconiah in verse 11, and we'll count forward from there. Jeconiah 1, Salathiel 2. I actually had I think a great granduncle named Salathiel. Zerubbabel 3, Abiud 4, Eliakim 5, Azor 6, Zadok 7, Achan 8, Eliud 9, Eleazar 10, Mathan 11, Jacob 12, Joseph 13, and Jesus 14. So there you can see again how those three sets of 14 fit rather nicely. So then the next question to me is, okay, well now, because they say when you do genealogy, Gail may have heard this too, because I know she does genealogy, that if you want to start genealogy, start with yourself and move backward. So in this case, Jesus is the more recent figure of the whole group. So in essence, we are starting with Jesus and moving backward. In fact, the way Matthew wrote it, he wrote, if we had gone from 17 backwards, we could do it that way. But now the question in my mind was, well, if Abraham began the genealogy in Matthew 1, where do we need to go to find his genealogy and pick him up and then go backwards from there. And in this case, I'll have everybody turn their Bibles back to Genesis. And I guess part of me wants to go forward. Actually, you know what? It's easier to go forward, so let's do that. And then we're going to start where God creates Adam, the genealogy, and we're going to connect that to Abraham. So then what we're going to see is essentially a direct line with a few variations of God to Abraham. So go to Genesis chapter 5, right in the beginning of the Bible. And
you mean Adam? Did you mean Adam too?
Well, I like to say God because God created Adam.
Okay.
And we'll pick up both in the same paragraph. So if we're looking at chapter 5, verse 1, you'll see that Adam and God mentioned in the same paragraph.
Mm-hmm.
And then he talks about Adam through verse 5. Again, we're in Genesis 1. Genesis chapter 5, verses 1 through 5. And then you'll just have to trust me on the names, which we can validate later, but I'll show you the line in exact order. And I think there's only one person omitted in Genesis, which is picked up in a different chapter. So there's Adam. As we know, they first had Cain. Cain killed Abel, so they needed a third child to carry out the royal line to connect it to Christ, and that was Seth. So we pick up Seth in verse 6.
Yeah.
I think I have that in 6 and 7. I wrote that down wrong, but that's correct. And then Enos in verse 7. I feel like some of my writing's off here. And then we go to Canaan in verse 9. And verse 12, Canaan had Mahalalel there. And then there's going to be a few names, so just bear with me. And then Mahalalel had Jared in verse 15. Jared had Enoch in verse 18. And remember, Enoch was considered one of those who never died.
Yeah.
And that God took him up. And I'm trying to see, I didn't write the verse down. There it is, verse 24. You can see that it says, and Enoch walked with God, and he was not, for God took him up. And then Enoch had Methuselah, and we see that in verse 25 and 26. And then we have Lamech, who was the father of Noah. So verse 30 and 31, there you'll see that. And then Noah had 3 sons, which many biblical scholars think make up all the races and ethnicities of the entire world, broken out over the 3 sons, including maybe, for those 3 sons. Of course, they all married, and there was 8 people on Noah's Ark that we know at the very least. And that's where they say. So then we have to say, okay, well, then which one of Noah's sons did the line of Jesus go through? By memory, there's Ham and Japheth, but the priestly line came through Shem. And you'll see his name. Actually, you'll see all 3 that I just named in verse 32, which ends chapter 5. So then we have to find out who was Shem's son and keep going in the line. So you have our facts head in verse, let's see what I have there. Feel like I wrote the verses down wrong, but I'm definitely getting the names correctly. But let's continue on from there. And you have Selah. Oh, I know why. Skip to chapter 11, Genesis 11. And this is why it can get difficult. Sometimes you'll get it in a straight line, depending which genealogy you're looking at in the Bible. And sometimes because, for example, they spent a couple chapters talking about Noah. So we actually have to go back and find out, okay, well, then where does the line pick up next? And we go to chapter 11 and verse 10. Here we pick up on Shem again. See that? And then he had Arphaxad right there. So that's where the line picks up again. And then after Arphaxad, you have Selah. Now, here's just a quick omittance. The book of Luke, which we can talk about later, they add a person between Arphaxad and Selah, a person named Canaan. But in this case, it was omitted, and they might have a reason for that. But that's just a side note. So then we need to go into verse 14 and 15. There you see Selah. He has Eber. Eber has Peleg. Peleg has Ro. Ro has Serug. And then Nahor. And then Terah. Now in verse 11:18. That was Peleg. 11:20 is Reu. Serug is 11:22. And then Nahor is 11:24. And then you can see Terah, who was the father of Abraham, said, I think he was believed to said to be worshiping idols. But I think at some point he also left. I think he left with Abraham to get out of that land. So there's the connection. So I know that took a little bit of time, but I wanted to try to cover everybody. And you'll see how Abraham, which is the oldest person we left off in the book of Matthew, his line picks up in 11:29. And then after that, it will really start skipping because they spend so much time talking about what we would call the patriarchs that you would a lot of people know it goes Abraham, Isaac, Jacob. But in order to find all that, you have to really start skipping chapters right now. And you know what, for the sake of time, I'm going to skip some of that. I'll just say that Isaac comes along in Genesis 21. Jacob comes along in chapter 25. Judah comes along in chapter 29. And you can even find Pharez, son of Judah, in 38. And even Hezron is mentioned in 46. And then you start getting, I think, into a little bit more recent times. And sometimes you have to go into some other books. But you'd be surprised at how many people, like, they might be able to tell you, yeah, I'm familiar with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And sometimes I like to ask them, well, which is the son of Jacob, which he had 12 sons, did the line of Jesus come through? And I just answered it earlier. It's in verse 20. It's in chapter 29, and that's Judah. Well, what's one of the reasons we know it other than we have other genealogies we can rely on? What is Jesus referred to later, I believe, in the book of Revelation, the Lion of Judah?
Yeah.
And so, in fact, and a lot of people know also about the stories of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, but it's also interesting to study the story of Judah. And there's quite a bit of information on that here in the book of Genesis. So I'm just going to set aside the genealogy for a second and talk about a couple other things. So,
well, Shane,
go ahead.
Did I miss the beginning of the importance of the genealogy?
I might cover some of that, but if you want to go ahead and add to it, go ahead.
No. I just, for those that might know how important it is to trace Jesus back through Mary and through Joseph.
I'm going to cover something in relation to that, but not that specifically. So why don't you go ahead and tell us? I can, or if you can answer that.
No, I wanted you to answer that, actually.
Well, the importance of it is to show, well, one way I look at it is like, do I know anybody that can track their line back, I don't know, past their 10th or 11th great grandfather? You know, in some cases you might be able to. If you're related to some kings in Europe, you may stand a pretty decent chance going back. I don't know. Some of my lines, whether they are accurate or not, I could go back to 300-400 AD. They would go back surprisingly. That's if you can connect to like a royal line. But most people that don't do genealogy, they can only name like their great grandparents at most. And then if you do genealogy, you might be able to name, a number of your fourth great grandparents or your fifth great grandparents or whatnot. But the reason, in my opinion, like one of the reasons the importance of it is to show that he's not a fictional character, that we actually can check his genealogical records. He's the only person I know living, well, he is living, that you can actually record as genealogical lines. Now, if we really looked into it and you did some internet researching or whatever, you will find Jewish people that can tell you what tribe they came from. Jacob had 12 sons. Those are all the different tribes. Hundreds and thousands of people came from those tribes, and the genealogy is incredible. In fact, I'm going to tell you, I will try to get to some reasons for why, like, how did we have the genealogy and why, and why. Did that answer your question a little bit, Mom?
Uh-huh.
Okay, good.
Well, it's just that it's monumental, really, that and you go to all the way to Joseph, and he must have been more than that it's represented, because he came out of that, royal line, really.
And they went out of their way to spend the time through the research to find out.
Which is a great time for this Bible study.
Was that Stephen?
It is.
Go ahead. What did you say again, hon? Are you there?
I'm sorry. No, yeah, carry on. I'm sorry about that.
No worries.
You wanted to say something, so go ahead.
No, it's okay. Carry on. I was just speaking to my parents. I'm sorry about that.
That's okay. All right. So, so that kind of answers it. Like, he's the only person I know that has a genealogy back to God. That's about the quickest way I can do it. But if you have Jewish ancestry and you can claim and track your line back to a tribe of Israel, one of the 12 sons of Jacob. Well, for those who don't know, Jacob changed his name to Israel. Or sorry, yeah, did I get that? Yes, I got that right. Jacob changed it. That's one of those name changes that it's not even close. Like Abram to Abraham, that's pretty easy, right? But when you completely change your spelling of your name and the meaning from Jacob to Israel, so there are some people that do that. In fact, there's a number of people in the Bible that claim genealogy to the youngest son of Jacob, which was Benjamin. So who was from the tribe of Benjamin? We know that Saul was the first king. I believe the apostle Paul might have been from the tribe of Benjamin. I know Mordecai in the book of Esther, he claims his tribe is from Benjamin. So that's all you have to do. If you can connect to the tribe, you may not exactly have all the names, but if you have a legitimate connection to a tribe, then you could track your line back to God. You can track your line back to Adam. Another thing is, if you go ahead and get your DNA tested today and you send it into one of these top-notch DNA readers, if you have any Jewish blood, it's going to come up in that in those results and sent back. I personally don't have any Jewish genealogy, but I've seen people come back with like a quarter or a fifth or something very small. But I've also seen, if you watch that show on TV, it's Channel 6. I can't think of the name of it right now, but they do a whole genealogy show. One time they had a Jewish person on the show. He was 100% Jewish. Like
it's called Your Roots.
Your Roots. Yeah, and I used to love watching that show. And then at the end, they'll show you your DNA results, and then they'll say, here's another actor you're related to that you didn't know, and it's all done. In fact, when I studied my genealogy and I went through the DNA, it will automatically line up your ancestors who match your DNA. And every time I would chase those down or research them, never was I led astray. I would always find someone that is legitimately related because the DNA doesn't lie. Especially if it's done properly.
Well, in the Jewish faith, you cannot be a leader of a church or a rabbi unless you're a Levi.
Yes. And there's another good name. So the Levites were called Levites. And who was a Levi? One of the most famous people in the Bible, Moses and his brother Aaron, were both Levites.
And I learned this from trivia. Matthew's other name is Levi.
Yeah, that's true too.
No, was that the priestly line? The ones that...
Yes.
Yep.
Like-
They served in the temple.
Okay.
Yeah, and they were responsible for carrying the artifacts of the tabernacle, the congregation, the Ark of the Covenant, and carrying out the priestly duties associated with the
Sacrifices.
tabernacle.
Yeah.
So, because the Jewish people are so about their genealogy before technology, that's why the genealogy of the Torah was so important, correct? Because you could not be, like Gail said, a priest unless you were from that line. So they probably have it all recorded. Is that why the scribes kept it so pristine?
Yeah, I mean, that's one of many reasons. I can't name them all right now, but another reason was, they had to like round up the tribes, take, which is something I was going to talk about a little later, take a census, and in order to formulate the army or the troops, the people fighting, because they would be separated by tribes. They would appoint probably the older brothers or the older uncles or whatnot as the captains of the and they had different, in the Civil War, you have regiments and companies and things of that nature. They had different terminology, the same way the Roman army had different terminology. And so they would need to know what tribe you were, because they would often split up the army according to the tribe that you came from. And what's another reason? Taxes, right? They wanted to get their taxes, so they needed to know where everybody lived and who everybody was from, because they wanted to get their money. Well, especially Rome, which was something I was going to talk about. So what are some of the things we use today to measure time? Now, if you got that attachment I sent, and we're not going to spend a lot of time on it, but they're measuring time based on the ages of the people in the Bible. So you notice at the very top left, there's Adam's birth, 0. That's his age. And they go forward and show you how long he lived, and they're measuring the dates by time. And there's if you're looking at that chart, there's some interesting things on it. They mention that 3 generations, let me rephrase that. 3 people basically made up the first 2,158 years, and that's Adam and Lamech and Shem. Because they lived so long, you have a lot of overlapping. And another thing to point out as far as overlapping goes, you'll see Abraham, who would have ever known, and it's the last sentence in the first paragraph on the left there, who would have ever known that Abraham was actually alive when Noah was still living?
That shocked me when I saw that.
Yeah.
And then they also, what do they say at the end there? Then Jacob was a contemporary with Shem. So a lot of these people could easily have known each other, lived near each other in roughly the same regions, and at least known of each other, and passed down information by way of word of mouth or even written material, which we have today. In fact, let's reference that verse. So everyone go to Genesis chapter 47. And I'm getting this verse from the top of the attachment that I sent you. And it's a very interesting verse that as they point out on the attachment. And so we're going to Genesis chapter 47, verse 8 and 9. Genesis 47, verse 8 and 9, and I'll read it. And the Pharaoh, so this is the Pharaoh associated with the time of Joseph, and we can find out that Pharaoh's name just by running back the archaeology of the pharaohs that were living at what dates. And Pharaoh said unto Jacob, how old are you? And Jacob said unto the Pharaoh, the days of my years of my pilgrimage are 130. And now look what he says, few and evil have the days of my years of my life. And he's saying, I lived to 130, but that's not that many years. See how he's saying how that's just a few years? And then he says, and I have not attained unto the days of the years of the life of my fathers in the days of their pilgrimage. So he's hinting that the people that lived before him lived longer lives.
Wow. Yeah.
And it wasn't until later that God said, I'm going to number man's life to about 120 years, which is considered a generation. And then this is something that's very hard for the people to believe today, right? That these people could have actually lived this long. And how could they have? And there, everybody could have an answer. I mean, there are a lot of potentially realistic answers for that. The earth was cleaner. The food might have been better. We had less chemicals. We had less smog. We had less bad influence in the world that we have today.
Less evil.
Yeah, I mean, and if we believe in the Garden of Eden, we'll know that was a beautiful place producing perfect fruit. And so it could have very well been this. Anyway, I just wanted to segue onto that verse, which shows you how Jacob responds to the Pharaoh at the time, right at the end of Genesis. What are other ways that we can measure time? So I said people's ages. We can measure time from archaeology. We can measure time from the Jewish feast days, because we know they have them at the same time every year and they have multiple feast days. And there's reasons for those feast days. They celebrate them today because of an event that happened in the Bible. We can measure time based on the kings that were in place, whether it be the kings of Judah, the kings of Israel, the pharaohs of Egypt, the emperors of Rome. Anyone who's seen my giant timeline can see how it all comes together, and you can just point back in a straight line through time and look and see who was leading which nation at which time, especially if they kept the records. And we have remarkable records kept from the Roman emperors and from the kings of Judah. Well, we've just been reading about all the kings of Judah. In fact, I think we covered about 20 of them when we went through the book of Matthew.
Mm-hmm.
How else? We have coins. They pull coins out of the ground, and they have pictures of the Roman emperors on them that were serving at the time. And to this day, I like to use this quote: "There's nothing that's pulled out of the ground that has proven the Bible wrong." So we can hang our hat on these archaeological digs. We can look at the coins. We have documents on papyrus and other.
I was thinking of that. Yeah.
And other methods, right? Well, what's another good one? Calendars. Okay, we have calendars, and the Hebrew calendar has been around for a long time, and they're about 29 to 30 days. They do vary. The calendar days range from either 353, 354, or 355 in a common year, all the way to 383, 384, and 385 in a leap year. This year, the Jewish year is 354 days, and it always starts. Each month starts on a new moon, and that's how they measured the days. And so there's another one. I didn't even write it down, right? We have our astronomy.
Oh, yeah.
And the stars. I remember my dad talking about how he used to, when he was flying his airplane as a navigator, they would bounce light off some of the stars to validate the distance that they were at when they were flying and where they needed to go. So these formations in the sky have been around forever, and they have not changed. They move, but they haven't changed, and people can track them. And there's a lot of ways we can track it. So today, going back to calendars, we used the Gregorian calendar. That was introduced in 1582 by one of the popes, and then and that was revised from the Julian calendar. In fact, on October 4th, 1582, they actually, the very next day, actually it was October 15th, they literally went ahead in time 10 days in order to catch up with like some technicalities of the calendar. So when people say, you know, I want to know what exact day Jesus was born on, and expecting you to have the exact day and year. Well, it varies, right? Are we going by the Hebrew calendar? Are we going by the Gregorian calendar? Are we going by the Julian calendar? You know, what is it we're going by? And what did they say back in the book of Daniel? They'll seek to change times and laws. Okay, because sometimes if you change time, you can confuse people, and it makes it harder to track things.
Just like daylight savings time.
I hear you.
Yeah, and I know they're trying to do away with that, aren't they?
They're always trying to do away with that.
So what do we have today that's a great measurement of the Bible? The year that we're in, 2025. 2025, what? From the years Jesus died.
Yeah. Yeah.
That should be right there, one of the biggest evidence pieces you can point to someone to know. And what does AD mean? It's Latin for the year of our Lord.
Agnus Dei.
And I learned that from Steve Bannon on Rav.
When I was a kid, I used to always think it was after death.
I did too.
Oh.
Before Christ and after death. That's what I thought BC, AD, BC meant.
And the world wants you to think that, right? Because now
Yeah.
they can confuse us.
Yeah.
So let's skip forward to Luke, the book of Luke. And we'll go to let's start in chapter 2. And we're going to go verses 1 and 3. So the reason I'm going to read this is because, well, just kind of a quick reason why they might have counted the people and have census records and things of that nature. So when we look at Luke chapter 2, it says, and it came to pass, verse 1, and it came to pass in those days that went out a decree from Caesar Augustus that all the world should be taxed. And this taxing was first made when Cyrenius was governor of Syria, and all went to be taxed, everyone into his own city. So that's how they, that's another reason why they can start tracking people, know where you come from. And what do we have in genealogy today? We use the census records.
Yeah.
And we do have them going back into I think the 1790s here in America. But the census records got really good in 1850 because 1850 was the first year of the census record that they actually started including everybody by name. It used to be just the male and maybe the female in the prior records, but in 1850, they started writing the children's name down as well. So if you can track your genealogy back to 1850 and get a good 1850 census record, it can be very enlightening. So then let's go and, and then going back to Caesar, by the way, a lot of times they'll say, naysayers will say, well, that can't be, that Caesar wasn't living during those times. Well, little do they know that there were 3 different Caesars mentioned in the Bible. So you really have to know your stuff. So when someone, tries to doubt that, they don't know. Are they talking about Augustus? Are they talking about Tiberius? Or one of the others whose name's escaping me right now, but that's
Salad.
okay. No. So now go to chapter 3, Luke chapter 3. And we're going to go to verse 1 again. One of my favorite verses in the Bible right here. If you're a historian or you're a genealogist and you're trying to find out a day in time, check this out. Chapter 3, verses 1 and 2. Now in the 15th year of the reign of Tiberius, that was the third one right there.
Yeah.
Tiberius. Okay, I answered my own question. Tiberius Caesar, Pontius Pilate being governor of Judea. By the way, the naysayers always thought Pontius Pilate was a fictional character until they found a stone in an archaeological dig with his name on it.
And also remember that letter they found him describing Jesus.
Yeah, they had like a scribe that was writing down information.
Now
I'm still reading in 1. And Herod, being tetrarch of Galilee, and his brother Philip, tetrarch of Iturea, and of the region of Trachonitis, and Licinius, the tetrarch of Albi, and then Annas and Caiaphas, being the high priest, that would be of the Jewish temple. The word of God came unto John, the son of Zacharias in the wilderness. That's John the Baptist. Okay, so, and I've done this actually. I went down and looked up every single one of these persons, exactly when they were living, to see if I could prove these 2 verses to be wrong, and I couldn't. Everything matched up perfectly. Anyway, I kind of segued there, but I wanted to just show a little bit of that. Now we're in the perfect spot. So what happens in Luke chapter 3? I mentioned it earlier. This is the genealogical line of Mary, they say. Some people doubt it, but it's from Mary to God or to Adam, whoever you want to choose. Or let's just say Jesus to God. And this is where I say, and I counted it again today, and it matches right up. What's one of those crazy numbers in the world? 77. If you count, and this would be starting in Luke chapter 3, verse 23. If you take it there, start in 23, and you go all the way to the end of the chapter, you will get 77 generations in the maternal line of Jesus all the way back to Adam. And I'm definitely not going to go ahead and read all the names right now, but there might be a couple things I can point out if you're just scanning through it, for example. Let's see where we can pick it up. Okay, let's see here. Okay, so if you go down, let's say right there, 31. There's King David. Remember we read about him just a minute ago, or to open the meeting tonight in Matthew chapter 1. So then you go, well, how can Mary have King David in his line? And how can Joseph also have King David in his line? That's because they're cousins. This David right here makes Joseph and Mary cousins. So in other words, they share the same great multiplied by 3 or 4 grandfather, David. How do we know? Well, Joseph went through the line of Solomon, son of David. Mary, here, how do we know? Look who she goes through. Right there in 31, David's son, Nathan. Remember David had a son, Nathan? Uh-huh. And so we know that Nathan and Solomon were brothers.
Oh, wow.
So that's what makes Joseph and Mary cousins. Mm-hmm. Distant cousins. Very distant. We could probably ballpark the type of cousins they are. Probably like 25th cousins, something crazy like that. And remember, we multiplied it. I think I mentioned it last week. We have 16 second great grandparents, 32 third grades, 64 fourth grades, 128 fifth grades, and you just keep doubling. When you get back to 22, you're talking thousands of relatives, tens of thousands. Here's Boaz mentioned again, Obed in verse 32. You go into 33, and notice we're going back in time. We started with Jesus. We're going back in time. So if you now, here it is. Look where we pick up on 34. There's Jacob, Isaac, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Do you see that? All in verse 34. They have the same exact ancestors. And now let's get back to Adam real quick. Keep going back in time to chapter 30, verse 35, verse 36. There's Sem, but notice they called him Shem. In the other book, they called him Shem in Matthew, and a different one in Luke. You never know. They might be using the Latin. They might be using the Greek. They might be using the Hebrew. It depends how it's translated. Look at Noah. Let's see how Noah is spelled in my book. Noah is spelled N-O-E. But that's Noah, who was there during the time of the flood. And then you can go all the way back. And where do we see Adam and God? To end Luke chapter 3. 77 generations in Mary's line. So we have about 10 more minutes. So I'm going to go ahead and see if I can pull up a couple more things here. I'm not going to have everyone flip there, but I'll just read it. I want to give a couple more read it. Actually, while I read one, why don't you everyone flip their books to 1 Chronicles chapter 1. And while you guys are going to 1 Chronicles chapter 1, I was going to read a verse. This is 2 Samuel 24:1. Mm-hmm. And it says, and again, the anger of the Lord was kindled against Israel, and he moved David against them, King David, to say, go number Israel and Judah. That means find out how many there are. It's like doing a census, a modern day census. They're just using the word go number them. That means go find out everybody who's living. We want to know. And at that time, it appears to have angered God. There's another area in here. Well, we'll get to it in a second. So now if you guys are in 1 Chronicles chapter 1, not only do I want to show you something in chapter 1, look at the very beginning of 1 Chronicles chapter 1. Another genealogy, and a rather in-depth genealogy too. In fact, this one doesn't start with God, but look who it starts with. Adam. And here we go again, back in time through all the patriarchs. Now, one I really want to show. Okay, so let's look at something that I found to be interesting. I'm trying to remember where Noah is. I think he's in 1:3. There he is, Noah. You see his 3 sons in verse 4. There's the sons, Noah and his 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. So we know that the flood was during the time of Noah. Who do Bible scholars, when do they date the flood? They date the flood about 2348 BC. Okay, so you could say we're about 4,400 years or so removed from the flood today. Mm-hmm. And then I found this to be very interesting. So, have you ever thought why we have pyramid type structures on every continent in the world, or close to many? I mean, you can even find pyramid structures down in South America, even some, I think, even some of the southern states. You'll see them in South America, you'll see them in Egypt, and you'll see these giant pyramids or ziggurats, which are types of pyramids in Iran and Iraq. And they're really like, it seems to be like, well, what happened? Like, how do we explain that? How do we know? Like, what's the reason we have these similar structures all over the world when the seas are so far away and people might not have been able to travel the ocean the way that they could? How did this happen? Well, watch this. Go to First Chronicles 1 and drop down to verse 19. And we're talking about Eber. We've read about Eber in, I believe, Genesis. We read about him in Luke. He's also, I think, in Matthew. And look what it says here. And I'll read it. And unto Eber, verse 19, were born two sons. The name of one was Peleg, because in his days the earth was divided.
Oh.
So back in the day when the earth was together, what's the modern day term for that? It's called a Pangea.
You mean when there weren't as many oceans?
Well, there might not have been any ocean. If there were, the oceans might have surrounded the earth one way or another. Like we might have had one giant land mass. Now, have you ever, and you'll see a lot of scholars that believe this. I believe it because you can't have your eyes full. Do you see how South America could fit into Africa?
Oh, yes.
Oh, it looks like a puzzle.
And Africa could moves up in toward, I mean, it all just comes together. It's like a big puzzle.
Yes. And then we have the tectonic plates. We have it written in the Bible here that the earth was divided. So back in the day, these people were probably building similar structures in one landmass. And then over time, the earth got divided. And so this is one of those things that's kind of easy to overlook, especially if you don't read through the genealogy, because we don't get a lot of little gems like that. Yeah, we don't get a lot of details sometimes, and at that time we did. And then go ahead and go to same book, go to chapter 21, First Chronicles 21. And we're looking at verse 1. And look what it says there. First Chronicles 21, verse 1. And Satan stood up against Israel and provoked David to number Israel. So and the verses are interesting because they almost seem like they contradict each other. Because it says, well, the anger of the Lord was kindled in Samuel, but then here it's saying, and Satan stood up to Israel. Well, that might be one of those Book of Job stories where the devil asks God, can I go after Job? And God lets him. This might be, or how about Nebuchadnezzar, right? Israel's bothering me. And God said, you know what, then? I'm going to let Nebuchadnezzar have his way. Well, here's another thing. Israel's bothering me, so I'm just going to go ahead and let it be numbered. And I can't remember the exact reason, but back in the day, they weren't supposed to number all the people, probably because you can't, I don't know, you can't hide if you do. But then everyone gets accounted for. Everyone has to pay taxes. Everyone has to maybe go into the army because even today in Israel, whether you're female or male, you have to do service time in the army. And so there we have another numbering system.
Well, I think the Lord was mad at David because he wanted David, this is what I read, he wanted David to trust him for victory in battle and all, and he didn't need to be, by numbering it, it was like doubting.
That makes a lot of sense. That's very good. And
I just read, that was just part of my reading, so that's why.
Yeah.
I didn't understand why God was mad at David for numbering.
No, that's good. Sounds right on.
Here's some background.
Now, in the last 5 minutes, let's just go back to the book of Matthew, chapter 1, where we started. And I'm just going to point out a couple things. Not only did we have the genealogy of Joseph here, but we also have all the kings of Judah. Now, many of these kings, in fact, most of them, of the kings of Judah, and I said earlier there were 19 plus a queen. Athaliah was her name. There was also the kings of Israel. So we had 3 kings, the nation split. So then you had a line of 19 kings in Judah go down, which helps us number, not only the time, but it really helps us figure out where in time we are and whatnot. And then when the nation split at the same time, Israel ran off 20 kings. So you have all these kings, and what happened basically? Well, remember, God didn't want them to have a king, but the people kept bugging him to have a king, so they gave him Saul. And then if you've been watching the House of David, it doesn't go very well.
Mm-mm.
And so, what's the old saying? And I think it's a biblical saying: "A nation divided cannot stand." Well, what happened during the Civil War when the North decided to go against the South? You know, we had probably the most losses ever. Go ahead.
I said the South decided to go against the North.
Yes, and we ended up we're having more casualties. I think the only war that may have had more casualties was World War II. So the Civil War was a devastating war that not only did a lot of people die from just wounds, a lot of people died from disease as well.
Mm-hmm.
So now just to finish the study real quick, talk a little bit about the book of Matthew to try and give everybody a little idea on the times. Look at verse 7. King Solomon's mentioned, the richest and wisest man probably who ever lived. Well, we know that he built the temple at about 957 BC. So that'll give you an idea of when he came about, right about the year 1000 BC. David, same thing, a little bit before that. Then I said earlier that we have Rehoboam in verse 7. He was the first king of Judah. Abiah, second king of Judah. Asa, third king of Judah. Notice how it's going in order. Like these are all Jesus' great grandfathers, even though some of them did evil. So even if you do evil, that does not mean that God can't find a place for you in his plan. Might not be a good one, but sometimes he can turn bad things into good. And he did it many times. There's Asa in chapter 8. Now we're getting below 1000 BC. Josaphat, fourth king of Judah. Keeping in line here, Jehoram, fifth king of Judah. And then we have the skips I was telling you about. We go to Azariah, 10th king of Judah. It goes all the way. It keeps going and going. I'm going to skip some for the sake of time. We get to Manasseh in verse 10, 14th king of Judah. Josiah, or Amon, 15th. Josiah, 16th. Now, Josiah, when was the taking of Babylon? We know, 597 BC. That's when everybody was taken away from the Holy Land to Babylon, including Daniel. So you can just see right there the building of the temple, 957 to BC, to the destruction, 597 BC. And we keep going down. And let's say we get to about, I just made a note in here that around 483 BC, and I don't have any dates of the people in here, but you know the book of Esther, it's an old book in the Old Testament. We know that that book was written because she was writing about the reign of Xerxes. And we know that his reign was about 483 to 473 BC. Now remember the books Ezra and Nehemiah, also Old Testament books. Well, we know that they returned to Jerusalem to rebuild the walls. And we know that that was about the time Ezra returned in 458 BC and Nehemiah to 444 BC. So you can see that the Bible, although there is a little gap towards the end, which I think the book of Maccabees covers. I think it covers some of that time that's not covered in the Bible, where you basically go from the last book of the Old Testament to Jesus' return. So that's about it, folks.
Wow.
Wow. Yeah.
Amazing.
Fabulous.
A lot of begottens.
Yeah, but I mean, it adds so much credence that, you know, when you're a new believer, I didn't know any of that. I wanted to scan through all that part because it, you know, all the big old names.
Yeah, I remember because my pastor told me to read the Gospels, you know, the first 4 Gospels start there. And I, you know, started in Matthew and I was all boring. What's this begotten stuff?
Yeah, you're immediately
Yeah,
brought
I
into
was
the
all,
genealogy.
yeah. Yeah.
for Genesis, right? Because when you get to chapter 5,
Yeah.
or even if not earlier, you go right into the genealogy there as well. And then if someone tell you to do Exodus or Leviticus, next thing you'll know, you'll be watching the measurements of, or reading about the measurements of the tabernacle for 4 chapters straight.
Yeah.
And you're
The
going, how am I going to do this?
everything's a cubit.
Yeah. I'm all, what? But now, as I'm maturing as a believer, it's fascinating. And
Absolutely.
when you look at the timeline Shane has, I mean, nobody can deny Jesus existed. Like,
Exactly.
I mean, there's so much evidence. It's it's just even an atheist, can change their mind when he looks at all the facts. And that's what I love, those stories where they're full atheists and they're going to try to prove Jesus didn't exist. And they end up being, strong believers because the evidence is overwhelming.
Yeah. Yeah.
What I think is fascinating about both genealogies with both Joseph and Mary is it's undeniable that Jesus is the Son of God.
Mm-hmm.
Either way.
Yeah.
And that's a fantastic reason, Gail, for what my mom asked earlier. Why did they do it? Right? You just answered probably the best reason of all.
Yeah. Right. It's good. Good stuff.
Okay, so we went over a few minutes, but that's okay. It was kind of good to go through this. One of these days, I'll try and fine tune this study. It's kind of the first time that I've ever done it, but those who know me know I like genealogy. And this was a good area to talk about, and like how many people know there's genealogy in First Chronicles chapter 1. No, by the way, there's more genealogy in Numbers and the Book of Ruth. So that's a whole nother story.
Wow.
He sure had a good time doing this.
Not really. It wasn't very easy, but the notes that I made, I might be able to form some spreadsheets out of it or something at some point, so people can find everything a lot easier. And then when the names change, that's really tough. Like that, like so. If we've done deep genealogy today, and someone changes their name, maybe they were adopted, or maybe they didn't like one of their parents' last names, they change it. That's a real effective way to throw off a genealogist. Makes it very hard.
You mean if I identify as a cat, you're not going to be able to find me?
Possible. No, I'll have to look into the species.
Oh, a furry. You're going to be a furry.
All right. Well, I want to thank everybody for attending tonight. We're going to go ahead and pick it up again next week on a new subject. Feel free to throw ideas out if you want. We have hundreds already if you don't. I usually don't decide in advance. We like to pray about it and hope that God can find a good subject for us to talk about. Thanks again for everyone attending, and I'll pray us out.
Thank you, Shane.
Thank you. Dear Father, thank you for bringing us together, our cousins and our aunts and our friends and family. And we ask that you bring your blessings down for all of us, that you help give us your wisdom. And we thank you for all that we do. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. Well, thank you.
Julie, I found your bracelet.
Oh, cool. Thank you.
I didn't lose a bracelet, Gail.
Who? Maddie?
The other Julie.
I had a spare.
You're
So that was
Julianne.
good, though.
I forgot. I'm Julianne on the East Coast.
Yeah. Okay. Well,
All right, everybody.
Thanks for
love you all.
joining, Stephen.
Yeah, have a great
Of
night.
course. No, I appreciate the practice. Thanks, guys.
Bye, everybody.
Love
Bye.
you. Bye.